For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of September 12, 1995, 16-year-old Ashley Morrison left her family's home in suburban Columbus, Ohio, for what should have been an ordinary day at Westfield High School. She never arrived. Despite an extensive investigation involving local police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers, Ashley vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a devastated family. For 2 years, Ashley's parents, Robert and Patricia Morrison, lived with the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. Then, in August 1997, while installing a new fence in their backyard, Robert Morrison made a discovery that would shatter everything the family thought they knew about Ashley's disappearance. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Ashley Morrison, from her mysterious disappearance on a quiet residential street to the shocking revelation that would expose a truth far closer to home than anyone had ever imagined. Chapter 1. The morning she vanished, September 12, 1995, began like any other Tuesday morning in the Morrison household on Elm Street in Westfield, a middle-class suburb on the northwest side of Columbus, Ohio. Ashley Morrison, a junior at Westfield High School, had followed her usual morning routine: shower at 6:30 a.m., breakfast with her family at 7 a.m., and gathering her books for the school day. Ashley was a responsible teenager who rarely caused her parents any concern. She maintained a B average, was active in the school's drama club, and had a part-time job at a local bookstore. Her teachers described her as mature for her age and reliable in her commitments. According to her mother, Patricia Morrison, Ashley had seemed completely normal that morning. She was talking about auditions for the fall play, Patricia later told investigators. She was excited because they were doing Our Town, and she really wanted to play Emily. She asked me to help her practice her lines that evening. Robert Morrison, who worked as an insurance adjuster, had already left for work by the time Ashley was ready for school. Patricia, a part-time administrative assistant at a medical office, was getting ready for her 9 a.m. shift when Ashley gathered her backpack and headed for the door. Ashley's routine was well established. She would walk 4 blocks north on Elm Street, then turn east on Maple Avenue for 3 blocks to reach Westfield High School. The total walk took approximately 15 minutes, and Ashley had been making this journey independently since her sophomore year. At 7:45 a.m., Ashley kissed her mother goodbye and left through the front door. She was wearing her favorite outfit, a burgundy sweater, dark blue jeans, and white sneakers. She carried a dark green backpack containing her textbooks, notebooks, and school supplies. Patricia Morrison watched from the living room window as Ashley walked north on Elm Street, just as she had hundreds of times before. This would be the last time anyone in Ashley's family would see her alive. The first indication that something was wrong came at 10:30 a.m. when the school's attendance office called the Morrison home. The automated system had recorded Ashley as absent from her first period English class, and the school's policy was to notify parents of unexcused absences before noon. Patricia Morrison was at work when she received the call from the school. Initially, she assumed there had been some mistake or that Ashley had simply been late and the attendance hadn't been updated. However, when she called the school directly to clarify, she learned that Ashley had not been present for any of her morning classes. Growing concerned, Patricia left work and drove home, hoping to find Ashley there with an explanation for missing school. When she arrived at the empty house, she immediately called Robert at his office. Robert Morrison's first instinct was that Ashley might have gone to a friend's house or decided to skip school for some reason. While this would have been completely out of character for their daughter, he suggested that Patricia call Ashley's close friends to see if anyone had seen her. Patricia spent the next hour calling Ashley's friends, her drama club advisor, and her supervisor at the bookstore. No one had seen Ashley since the previous day, and several friends mentioned that Ashley had been looking forward to school that day because of drama club tryouts. By 1 p.m., with no explanation for Ashley's absence, the Morrisons decided to call the Columbus Police Department. The call was received by Officer Jennifer Walsh, who took down the basic information and advised the family that Ashley would need to be missing for 24 hours before a formal missing person report could be filed. However, Officer Walsh was experienced enough to recognize that Ashley's disappearance was unusual. The teenager had no history of running away, no known conflicts with her family, and no apparent reason to miss school voluntarily. Officer Walsh advised the Morrisons to continue calling Ashley's friends and to notify the police immediately if they heard anything. At 3:30 p.m., when Ashley should have been returning home from school, Robert Morrison decided to drive her usual route to look for any signs of where she might have gone. He drove slowly along Elm Street and Maple Avenue, stopping to ask neighbors if they had seen Ashley that morning. Mrs. Eleanor Chen, who lived 2 blocks from the Morrison home, told Robert that she had seen Ashley walking north on Elm Street at approximately 7:50 a.m. She looked completely normal, Mrs. Chen said. She was walking at her usual pace and seemed to be heading to school like always. This was the last confirmed sighting of Ashley Morrison. Despite Robert's continued searching throughout the afternoon and evening, no other neighbors reported seeing her after Mrs. Chen's observation. At 8 p.m. on September 12th, exactly 12 hours after Ashley had left for school, the Morrisons called the police again. This time, they spoke with Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who agreed to meet with the family that evening to begin a preliminary investigation. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the Morrison home at 9:30 p.m. and conducted extensive interviews with both parents. She noted that the family seemed genuinely distraught and that there were no obvious signs of conflict or problems that might have caused Ashley to run away. The parents were clearly devastated, Detective Rodriguez later wrote in her report. Their concern appeared genuine, and they were cooperative in providing information about Ashley's routines, friends, and activities. There were no red flags in the family dynamics. By the end of that first day, it was clear that Ashley Morrison's disappearance was not a simple case of a teenager skipping school or running away. Something had happened to interrupt her routine walk to school, and the implications of that realization would haunt the Morrison family for years to come. Chapter 2. The search intensifies. The formal missing person investigation into Ashley Morrison's disappearance began at 6 a.m. on September 13, 1995, exactly 22 hours after she had last been seen. Detective Lisa Rodriguez was assigned as the lead investigator, and she immediately began organizing a comprehensive search effort. The first priority was to retrace Ashley's route to school and to interview every resident along the path she would have taken. Detective Rodriguez assembled a team of 6 officers who conducted door-to-door interviews throughout the Westfield neighborhood. The canvass of the neighborhood revealed that several residents had been outside during the time Ashley would have been walking to school. In addition to Mrs. Chen's sighting, investigators found 3 other witnesses who had seen Ashley that morning. Mr. James Patterson, who had been retrieving his newspaper at 7:52 a.m., confirmed seeing Ashley walking north on Elm Street. "She was about a block ahead of me," he told investigators. "Nothing seemed unusual. She was walking normally and appeared to be heading to school." Mrs. Dorothy Williams, who lived on the corner of Elm Street and Maple Avenue, reported seeing Ashley turn east onto Maple Avenue at approximately 7:55 a.m. This was significant because it confirmed that Ashley had reached the halfway point of her journey to school. The most important witness was 14-year-old Kevin Martinez, who lived on Maple Avenue and had been waiting for his school bus when Ashley walked past. Kevin told investigators that he had seen Ashley walking east on Maple Avenue at about 8 a.m., but he also noticed something unusual. "There was a van parked on the street," Kevin said. "It was white or light-colored, and it had been there for a while. When Ashley walked past, I saw the van start up and begin driving slowly behind her." Kevin's observation was the first potential clue about what might have happened to Ashley. Detective Rodriguez immediately focused on identifying the van and determining whether it was connected to Ashley's disappearance. The investigation expanded to include a search for the van Kevin had described. Police bulletins were issued to all officers in the Columbus area, and the media was asked to publicize the description of the vehicle. However, the description was too general to be of immediate help. White or light-colored vans were common in the area. Meanwhile, the physical search for Ashley began in earnest. Volunteers from the Westfield community organized search parties that combed through parks, wooded areas, and any locations where Ashley might have gone voluntarily or been taken against her will. The Columbus Police Department also requested assistance from the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which provided helicopter support for aerial searches of the area. The helicopters searched a 10-mile radius around Ashley's last known location, looking for any signs of the missing teenager. On September 15th, 3 days after Ashley's disappearance, the FBI joined the investigation. Special Agent Maria Santos was assigned to the case, bringing federal resources and expertise in missing person investigations involving possible interstate crimes. Agent Santos's first action was to conduct detailed interviews with Ashley's friends, teachers, and co-workers to determine if there were any aspects of her life that her parents might not have been aware of. This process, while sensitive, was necessary to understand whether Ashley might have been involved in activities that could have put her at risk. The interviews revealed that Ashley had been a typical teenager with normal relationships and interests. She had a close group of friends, was well liked by her teachers, and had no known enemies or conflicts. Several friends mentioned that Ashley had recently started showing interest in a boy from her drama club, but this relationship was innocent and well known to her parents. One concerning piece of information emerged from Ashley's co-workers at the bookstore. They reported that in the weeks before her disappearance, Ashley had mentioned feeling like someone was watching her. She had told her supervisor, Mrs. Helen Foster, that she sometimes felt like she was being followed on her way to work. Ashley said she had noticed the same car a few times when she was walking, Mrs. Foster told investigators. She thought it might be coincidence, but it made her uncomfortable. She asked if someone could walk her to her car after her evening shifts. This information suggested that Ashley might have been stalked before her disappearance, supporting the theory that her kidnapping had been planned rather than opportunistic. Investigators immediately began looking into whether the car Ashley had noticed was the same van seen by Kevin Martinez. The search efforts continued throughout September 1995, with hundreds of volunteers participating in organized searches every weekend. The case received significant media attention throughout Ohio, and Ashley's photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the Midwest. Despite the extensive efforts, no physical evidence of Ashley's disappearance was found. No clothing, no backpack, no signs of struggle, nothing that could provide investigators with concrete leads about what had happened to her. In October 1995, investigators received what initially seemed like a promising lead. A truck driver reported seeing a teenage girl matching Ashley's description at a rest stop in Indiana on September 13th. The girl had been with an older man and had seemed distressed. However, further investigation revealed that the sighting had been a false alarm. The girl in question was located and confirmed to be a different person entirely. This false lead was emotionally devastating for the Morrison family, who had allowed themselves to hope that Ashley might still be alive. As autumn turned to winter, the active search efforts were gradually scaled back. The case remained open and active, but the daily searches and extensive media coverage decreased as other cases demanded attention and resources. The Morrison family, however, never stopped searching. Robert and Patricia continued to distribute flyers, follow up on tips, and maintain contact with investigators. They also hired a private investigator, retired police detective Thomas Murphy, to continue working on the case. Detective Murphy's investigation focused on the potential stalking behavior that Ashley had reported to her coworkers. He spent months reviewing security footage from businesses along Ashley's regular routes and interviewing residents about suspicious vehicles in the neighborhood. While Detective Murphy's efforts didn't produce immediate results, they did uncover additional witnesses who had noticed unusual activity in the neighborhood during the weeks before Ashley's disappearance. Several residents reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked on their streets, though none could provide detailed descriptions. As 1995 came to an end, Ashley Morrison had been missing for over 3 months. The investigation had consumed thousands of hours of police work and involved hundreds of volunteers, but Ashley's fate remained a mystery. The case was officially classified as a cold case, though it remained technically active. For the Morrison family, the transition from active search to cold case was heartbreaking. They had to accept that their daily lives would continue without knowing what had happened to their daughter, while never giving up hope that answers would eventually emerge. Chapter 3. Living with uncertainty. The years 1996 and early 1997 were marked by a gradual but painful adjustment to a new reality for the Morrison family. Ashley's disappearance had fundamentally changed their lives, affecting every aspect of their daily routines and their relationships with each other and their community. Patricia Morrison returned to work in November 1995, but found it difficult to concentrate on her duties. Her co-workers at the medical office were understanding and supportive, but Patricia often found herself distracted, wondering if Ashley might try to contact her at work or if investigators might call with news. Robert Morrison threw himself into his work as a way of coping with the uncertainty. However, he also spent every spare moment following up on leads, researching missing person cases, and maintaining contact with law enforcement agencies. He became an expert on missing person investigations, learning about search techniques and investigative procedures. The couple's relationship was strained by their different coping mechanisms and the constant stress of not knowing Ashley's fate. Patricia wanted to maintain hope that Ashley was still alive somewhere, while Robert increasingly feared the worst. These different perspectives led to frequent arguments and periods of emotional distance. In March 1996, 6 months after Ashley's disappearance, the case was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. The segment included interviews with the Morrison family, Detective Rodriguez, and several witnesses who had seen Ashley on the morning she vanished. The television exposure generated hundreds of tips from viewers across the country. Detective Rodriguez and her team spent weeks following up on these leads, but most proved to be cases of mistaken identity or false memories. Several psychics also contacted the police with claimed visions about Ashley's location, but none provided useful information. One tip that seemed promising came from a woman in Michigan who reported seeing a girl matching Ashley's description at a shopping mall in Detroit. The witness was certain enough of the identification that Detroit police were asked to investigate. However, security footage from the mall showed that the girl in question was clearly not Ashley. The false leads were emotionally exhausting for the Morrison family. Each tip brought a surge of hope followed by crushing disappointment when it didn't pan out. Patricia later described this period as living on an emotional roller coaster that never stops. In June 1996, the Morrison family made the difficult decision to hold a memorial service for Ashley. They were careful not to call it a funeral, since Ashley's body had never been found, but they felt the need for some kind of ceremony to honor their daughter's memory and to provide closure for their friends and community. The memorial service was held at Westfield High School's auditorium, where Ashley had been planning to audition for the fall play. Over 300 people attended, including classmates, teachers, neighbors, and volunteers who had participated in the search efforts. During the service, Ashley's drama club advisor, Mrs. Janet Richardson, read from the play Our Town, specifically the final scene that Ashley had been hoping to perform. The reading was a touching tribute that moved many attendees to tears. The memorial service provided some emotional relief for the Morrison family, but it also marked a shift in how the community viewed Ashley's case. While people continued to hope for her safe return, the memorial service acknowledged the growing likelihood that she might not be coming home. As 1996 progressed into 1997, the active investigation into Ashley's disappearance continued at a reduced level. Detective Rodriguez had been assigned to other cases, but she continued to follow up on any new leads related to Ashley's case. The file remained open, and the case was reviewed periodically for any connections to other crimes. Private investigator Thomas Murphy continued to work on the case, though his efforts were limited by the Morrison family's financial resources. Murphy had identified several potential suspects based on his investigation of the stalking reports, but none had been conclusively linked to Ashley's disappearance. One suspect that Murphy found particularly interesting was a man named David Walsh, who had worked as a delivery driver for various companies in the Westfield area during 1995. Walsh drove a white van similar to the one described by Kevin Martinez, and he had been known to make unauthorized stops during his routes. Murphy's investigation revealed that Walsh had a history of inappropriate behavior toward young women, though he had never been arrested for any serious crimes. Most concerning was that Walsh had left Ohio shortly after Ashley's disappearance, moving to Florida without leaving a forwarding address. However, when Murphy finally located Walsh in Florida, the man agreed to speak with investigators and provided alibi information that checked out. Walsh's delivery logs showed that he had been working in a different part of Columbus on the morning Ashley disappeared, and co-workers confirmed his presence at that time. The elimination of Walsh as a suspect was another disappointment for the investigation. After nearly 2 years, investigators had identified and ruled out numerous potential suspects without finding anyone with a credible connection to Ashley's disappearance. In the spring of 1997, Robert Morrison decided to make some changes to the family home. The house had become a constant reminder of Ashley's absence, and both he and Patricia felt the need to create some new, positive associations with their environment. Robert's first project was to install a new fence around the backyard. The old chain-link fence had been damaged during the winter, and Robert felt that a new privacy fence would make the yard more enjoyable and might help Patricia feel more secure. The fence installation required digging post holes around the perimeter of the yard. Robert had always enjoyed working with his hands, and the physical labor provided a welcome distraction from the emotional stress of Ashley's ongoing disappearance. As Robert began the fence project in July 1997, he had no idea that his simple home improvement effort would lead to the discovery that would finally answer the questions that had haunted his family for nearly 2 years. The truth about Ashley Morrison's disappearance was literally buried in their own backyard, waiting to be uncovered by her father's shovel. Chapter 4. The devastating discovery. August 15, 1997 was an oppressively hot Saturday morning in Columbus, Ohio. Robert Morrison had started work on his fence project early, hoping to dig several post holes before the temperature became unbearable. He had been working on the fence installation for 3 weeks, making steady progress around the perimeter of the backyard. The area where Robert was working that morning was in the back corner of the yard, near a large oak tree that had always been Ashley's favorite spot. As a child, she had often played in the shade of the tree, and as a teenager, she had sometimes done her homework there on pleasant afternoons. Robert had been digging for about an hour when his shovel struck something that didn't feel like rock or root. The resistance was different, softer but substantial. Initially, he assumed he had hit a piece of buried debris, perhaps construction waste left by previous homeowners. As Robert carefully excavated around the obstruction, he began to uncover what appeared to be fabric. His first thought was that he had found an old tarp or piece of canvas that had been buried and forgotten. However, as he continued digging, the fabric began to take on a recognizable shape. The realization of what he was uncovering came gradually, then hit him with devastating force. The fabric was clothing, a burgundy sweater that he recognized with horrifying certainty. It was Ashley's sweater, the one she had been wearing on the morning she disappeared. Robert dropped his shovel and backed away from the hole, his mind struggling to process what he had found. For nearly 2 years, he had searched for Ashley, hoping against hope that she was alive somewhere. The discovery of her clothing in his own backyard shattered that hope in the most brutal way possible. With shaking hands, Robert called 911 from his cell phone. The dispatcher had difficulty understanding his initial words, as he was struggling to speak coherently. I found my daughter," he finally managed to say. "She's buried in my backyard." The first police officers arrived at the Morrison home within minutes of Robert's call. Officers Jennifer Walsh and Michael Stevens found Robert sitting on his back porch, staring at the partially excavated hole in his yard. Patricia Morrison was not home. She had gone grocery shopping and was unaware of her husband's discovery. Officer Walsh immediately recognized the Morrison name from Ashley's missing person case, which she had worked on during her early years with the Columbus Police Department. She quickly called for backup and requested that Detective Rodriguez be notified immediately. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the scene within 30 minutes, accompanied by forensic technicians and the coroner's office. By this time, additional officers had secured the backyard as a crime scene and had prevented any further disturbance of the burial site. The excavation of Ashley's remains was conducted with extreme care over the next several hours. Forensic technicians photographed every stage of the process and carefully collected any evidence that might provide clues about how Ashley had died and who was responsible for her murder. The discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears. Ashley Morrison had been dead since shortly after her disappearance in September 1995. However, the location of her burial raised disturbing new questions about who had killed her and how her body had ended up in her own family's backyard. Patricia Morrison returned home from grocery shopping to find her street blocked by police vehicles and crime scene tape around her house. When officers informed her of the discovery, she collapsed and had to be taken to the hospital for treatment of shock and emotional trauma. The forensic examination of Ashley's remains revealed that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The injury was consistent with being struck by a heavy object, though the specific weapon was never identified. There were no signs of sexual assault, which provided some small comfort to the family. More puzzling was the evidence surrounding Ashley's burial. The grave was approximately 3 feet deep and had been carefully covered and disguised. The location, directly under the oak tree, would have required someone with intimate knowledge of the Morrison property to select such a specific spot. Detective Rodriguez immediately began investigating how someone could have buried Ashley's body in the Morrison backyard without being detected. The yard was visible from several neighboring houses, and the burial would have required several hours of work during nighttime hours. The investigation revealed that the Morrisons had been away from home for 3 days in late September 1995, attending Robert's father's funeral in Pennsylvania. During this absence, someone would have had the opportunity to bury Ashley's body without risk of detection by the family. However, this timeline raised new questions about where Ashley's body had been kept between her disappearance on September 12th and the Morrison family's trip to Pennsylvania on September 24th. The forensic evidence suggested that Ashley had been killed shortly after her disappearance, meaning her body had been stored somewhere for nearly 2 weeks. The discovery of Ashley's body in her own backyard also forced investigators to reconsider everyone who had had access to the Morrison property. This included family members, close friends, neighbors, and service providers who might have been familiar with the yard's layout. Detective Rodriguez conducted extensive interviews with all of these individuals, looking for anyone who might have had both the opportunity to kill Ashley and the knowledge necessary to bury her body in such a specific location. The investigation focused particular attention on individuals who had been involved in the search efforts, as they would have had legitimate reasons to be familiar with the Morrison property. One person who immediately came under scrutiny was Thomas Murphy, the private investigator the Morrisons had hired to work on Ashley's case. Murphy had spent considerable time at the Morrison home, reviewing Ashley's belongings and discussing the case with her parents. However, Murphy's alibi for the critical time periods was solid. He had been working on other cases during Ashley's disappearance and had been hired by the Morrisons several weeks later. Additionally, Murphy had an established reputation and no apparent motive for harming Ashley. The investigation also examined the possibility that Ashley's killer was someone close to the family, perhaps a relative, family friend, or neighbor who would have known about the Morrison family's travel plans and had access to their property. This line of investigation was particularly painful for the Morrison family, as it required them to consider that someone they trusted might have been responsible for Ashley's death. However, Detective Rodriguez knew that statistically, most murders are committed by someone known to the victim. As the investigation continued, it became clear that solving Ashley's murder would be more complex than anyone had initially anticipated. The discovery of her body had answered some questions but had raised many others, and the killer had managed to conceal their crime for nearly 2 years. Chapter 5. Unraveling the truth. The investigation into Ashley Morrison's murder intensified dramatically following the discovery of her body. Detective Rodriguez assembled a task force that included federal agents, forensic specialists, and experienced homicide investigators from the Columbus Police Department. The first major breakthrough came from forensic analysis of the burial site. Crime scene technicians had meticulously examined every inch of soil around Ashley's grave, looking for any evidence that might identify her killer. Their careful work revealed several crucial clues that had been overlooked during the initial examination. Hidden beneath Ashley's body, investigators found a small piece of jewelry, a distinctive silver ring with a Celtic knot design. The ring was not one of Ashley's pieces, according to her parents, which meant it likely belonged to her killer and had been accidentally dropped during the burial process. The ring became a crucial piece of evidence. Detective Rodriguez had photographs of the ring distributed to local jewelry stores, pawn shops, and anyone else who might be able to identify its origin or ownership. The distinctive design suggested it might have been a custom piece or purchased from a specialty store. Within a week of distributing the ring's photograph, investigators received a call from Margaret O'Sullivan, the owner of a small jewelry store in downtown Columbus. O'Sullivan recognized the ring immediately. She had made it as a custom piece in 1994 for a customer who had specifically requested the Celtic knot design. O'Sullivan's records showed that the ring had been purchased by David Chen, a 28-year-old graduate student at Ohio State University. Chen had ordered the ring as a gift for himself, paying extra for the custom design and engraving his initials inside the band. David Chen lived approximately 2 miles from the Morrison home and had no obvious connection to Ashley or her family. However, when investigators began researching Chen's background, they discovered some concerning information about his activities and behavior. Chen was pursuing a doctoral degree in psychology at OSU, with a focus on adolescent development. His academic work required him to interact regularly with teenagers, and he had served as a volunteer counselor at several youth programs in the Columbus area. More troubling was the discovery that Chen had been fired from a volunteer position at a local community center in August 1995, just 1 month before Ashley's disappearance. The termination was due to complaints from parents about Chen's inappropriate interest in teenage participants, particularly young girls. When investigators interviewed the community center's director, they learned that several parents had reported that Chen had asked their daughters personal questions and had tried to arrange private meetings with them outside of the program. While Chen's behavior hadn't been criminal, it had been concerning enough to warrant his dismissal. Detective Rodriguez obtained a search warrant for Chen's apartment and academic office. The search revealed a disturbing collection of photographs, newspaper clippings, and personal information about teenage girls in the Columbus area. Among these materials was a folder specifically about Ashley Morrison, containing photos that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge. The folder included detailed notes about Ashley's daily routines, including her walking route to school, her work schedule at the bookstore, and her participation in drama club activities. The notes were dated from July and August 1995, confirming that Chen had been stalking Ashley for weeks before her disappearance. When confronted with this evidence, Chen initially denied any involvement in Ashley's disappearance. However, when presented with the ring and the stalking materials, he requested an attorney and refused to answer any further questions. Chen's attorney, Michael Brennan, no relation to the missing boy Tyler Brennan from the previous case, attempted to negotiate a plea arrangement, suggesting that his client might provide information about Ashley's death in exchange for reduced charges. However, prosecutors were determined to pursue the maximum penalties for Ashley's murder. The case went to trial in March 1998, nearly 3 years after Ashley's disappearance. The prosecution presented a compelling case based on the physical evidence, Chen's stalking behavior, and his opportunity to commit the crime. The trial revealed the full extent of Chen's obsession with Ashley. Prosecutors argued that Chen had been planning to abduct Ashley for weeks, studying her routines and waiting for the right opportunity. On the morning of September 12, 1995, Chen had used his white van to approach Ashley as she walked to school. According to the prosecution's theory, Chen had convinced Ashley to get into his van, possibly by claiming to know her parents or by creating some false emergency. He had then taken her to a remote location where he had killed her, either during a struggle or when Ashley attempted to escape. The prosecution argued that Chen had kept Ashley's body hidden for nearly 2 weeks while planning how to dispose of it permanently. When he learned that the Morrison family would be out of town for the funeral, he had used that opportunity to bury Ashley's body in her own backyard, believing it would be the last place anyone would think to look. Chen's defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that his client was being persecuted for having unusual interests and poor social skills. However, the combination of physical evidence, stalking materials, and opportunity proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Chen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to young women. During the sentencing phase, Chen finally admitted his guilt and provided details about Ashley's final hours. He confirmed that he had approached her on Maple Avenue, claiming that her mother had been in an accident and that he had been sent to take her to the hospital. Ashley had initially believed the story and had gotten into Chen's van willingly. However, when Chen had driven in the wrong direction, Ashley had realized she was in danger and had tried to escape. In the ensuing struggle, Chen had struck Ashley with a tire iron, killing her almost instantly. Chen had panicked after Ashley's death and had driven to a remote area where he had hidden her body in his van for nearly 2 weeks. When he learned about the Morrison family's travel plans through neighborhood gossip, he had decided to bury Ashley in her own backyard, believing that the location would divert suspicion away from him. The revelation of Chen's crime provided closure for the Morrison family, but it also opened new wounds. The knowledge that Ashley had been buried in their backyard for nearly 2 years was almost unbearable for Robert and Patricia, who had continued to hope for her safe return while unknowingly living just feet from their daughter's grave. The case had a profound impact on the Columbus community and led to significant changes in how missing person cases were handled. Law enforcement agencies implemented new protocols for investigating disappearances and for coordinating with academic institutions to monitor individuals who worked with children. For the Morrison family, Chen's conviction marked the end of nearly 3 years of uncertainty and the beginning of a long healing process. They eventually moved away from Columbus, unable to continue living in the house where Ashley had been buried. Ashley Morrison's case serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers that young people face from predators who may appear normal and trustworthy. It also demonstrates the importance of thorough investigation and the value of physical evidence in solving even the most complex cases. How it ended. The conviction of David Chen in 1998 brought legal closure to Ashley Morrison's case, but the emotional impact on her family and community continued for years. The Morrison family eventually established a foundation in Ashley's memory, focusing on education about personal safety and supporting families of missing children. The case led to significant improvements in how law enforcement agencies handle missing person investigations, particularly in terms of coordinating between different jurisdictions and maintaining long-term investigative efforts. It also highlighted the importance of listening to teenagers who report feeling stalked or threatened. Ashley Morrison's story remains a sobering reminder that danger can come from unexpected sources and that even the most careful families can become victims of predatory crime. Her memory lives on through the safety programs established in her name and through the continued vigilance of communities working to protect their children. The discovery of Ashley's body in her own backyard will forever stand as one of the most shocking twists in Ohio criminal history, demonstrating that sometimes the answers we seek are closer than we ever imagined, hidden in the most unlikely places.